Um, our first reader tonight is Scott Slovic. He is our new chair of the English department, and we're all very happy he is. He's an amazing credentialed scholar and one of the great experts in his area as a professor of literature and environment. He teaches nonfiction workshops as well in our MFA program. So please welcome Scott.
Thank you, Max, for the introduction. Thank you, Jamaica and Book People, for hosting us this afternoon. Thanks to Jennifer Hawk, who's done so much work in organizing this whole event, and to everyone else who had a hand in this. So we're all reading very short pieces. I think, are we having 5 of us read, then we're doing an intermission, and then 5 more, I believe. So I have a relatively brief piece of prose to read. It's not like a short lyric poem. I am, unfortunately, a prose writer. So it's an extended peek rather than a total furtive sneak peek at a piece of writing. So this is, I tried to think of something that I had written relatively recently. As Max mentioned, I'm a new administrator, so I do write a lot of letters of recommendation, and decided not to share any of those today. But over the fall, I was teaching in the University of Idaho's program called Semester in the Wild, which takes place in the heart of the Idaho wilderness. And I decided to read a short piece of writing that I did for a new book on Idaho wilderness that's being organized by the Idaho Humanities Council. This piece of writing is actually dedicated to a friend of mine who died at the end of August, a very prominent writer of American wilderness named Anne Zwinger. She died at the age of 90 on August 30th, the same day that we lost another great writer of place and western landscapes named Charles Bowden, August 30th, 2014. So this is, you may not know Anne Zwinger. This is, some of you who are familiar with her, this is one of her late books called The Nearsighted Naturalist. Really a terrific person and a beautiful writer. So I wrote this short essay called To Point the Way to Slow Us Down on the Importance of Guides in the Wilderness for Anne Zwinger, 1925 to 2014. And the epigraph is from Terry Tempest Williams' essay called Ode to Slowness. I want my life to be a celebration of slowness. So it's also kind of ironic to be quickly reading a piece which is intended to, in a sense, be a celebration of slowness. To point the way, to slow us down, to say, stop, take note, appreciate this wonder. All of us at one time or another need such a guide. I write this 3 weeks after the death of natural history writer Anne Zwinger, who played this role for many of us. Although her work focused on the canyon lands of the American Southwest and the high country of the Rocky Mountains rather than the Columbia River drainages that reach deep into the Idaho outback, I find her words to be useful guides and encouragements during my visits to the Taylor Wilderness Research Station, where I teach environmental writing in the University of Idaho's Semester in the Wild program. Thinking of Anne in September 2014, I scroll through the photos stored on my computer and come across an image of her at age 80 in 2004 during what I believe was her final rafting trip down the Grand Canyon. She had joined a group of friends, writers and eco-critics, for a 2-week float on the Colorado River. The picture I took shows one of the guides, scholar and poet Lance Newman, pointing out an interesting rock formation during one of our lunch stops. Anne, who guided so many others over the years, is perched at Lance's shoulder, eagerly listening and observing, as happy to be taught as to teach. The sense of being ever the learner was at the core of Anne's being, and is at the core of every natural history writer's life, perhaps all writers' lives. The world is full of beauty and mystery, more than we can ever contain. I write this early in the morning in my cabin at Taylor Ranch, located on Big Creek, 7 miles upstream from its confluence with the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, located in the heart of the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. Many consider this protected region, which together with the neighboring Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, constitutes the largest wilderness area in the United States south of Alaska, to be the crown jewel of Idaho's wilderness system. The landscape here is breathtaking in its apparent endlessness, ridge after ridge after ridge. Every crease in this landscape constitutes a watershed that flows into a vast system of creeks, each emptying ultimately into one of the forks of the Salmon River, or into the main Salmon, or up north into the Lochsaw and Clearwater rivers, and from there into the Snake River and ultimately the Columbia and the Pacific. I look from my room in the DeFleet cabin at Taylor out toward Big Creek, where Chinook salmon come to spawn, hundreds of miles inland from the ocean. The glass of water on my desk comes from Pioneer Creek, which rushes down from Dave Lewis Peak through Taylor Ranch and is pure enough for us to drink without filtering or any other form of treatment. Pretty unusual to find that kind of water in this country. Much of my time in the Frank Church has been spent at Taylor working with college students on their writing. This past week I taught careful reading, observation, and descriptive writing alongside my friend Jim Kingery, who's sitting right here, a recently retired botanist and rangeland ecologist from the College of Natural Resources at the University of Idaho. As I discussed words and intellectual traditions and strategies of expression, Jim guided our attention outward toward the place where we were studying. The grassy airstrip, the nearby river, the intricately vegetated mountainsides, rich with plant life even in the dry autumn season. I watched Jim as he taught the students. He beamed with enthusiasm, in love with plants, and with the sharing of this love. During our botanizing walks, we often progressed at the pace of 2 feet every 10 minutes. This is a celebration of slowness. 2 feet every 10 minutes. Each step of the way, plants called out to our guide. Here's the sandbird bluegrass, here the serviceberry, and here the Idaho fescue. Jim felt called to stop and translate the plant calls for the rest of us. We followed as if he were the Pied Piper. We trusted him and hung our own desire to know the world better, more intimately, on his long-trained eyes. We touched and smelled and tasted the world through his educated senses. One day I went hiking with my student, David Witt, who's an early riser like me. We began walking at 5:45 in the morning, laden with water bottles, aiming to follow Pioneer Creek up the densely overgrown canyon toward the summit of Dave Lewis Peak, about 10 miles away. Within half an hour, we lost the narrow trail in the dark and began bushwhacking upstream, eventually cutting west toward the high ridge that we believed would circle southeast and eventually back north toward the high point among the nearby mountains. We quickly learned that this mountainous landscape is much more complex and rugged than it seems from a distance. What appears to be a single ridge often splinters into multiple steep fingers of land as one approaches, each covered with slippery scree and fallen trees. Eventually, after hours of scrambling, David and I crested the western ridge of Pioneer Creek Canyon, only to find that it did not gently skirt the drainage and wind its way back toward the summit of Dave Lewis, but instead was interrupted by impassable cliffs. After a half-hour break to savor the views of mountains and valleys as far as we could see in every direction, we turned around and began our strenuous hike back to Taylor Ranch, ducking under burnt snags and jumping again and again over logs and brush. It was one of the most difficult hikes I've ever done in more than 4 decades of hiking throughout the American West and around the world. I came away from this experience after 9 hours of climbing, ducking, and jumping with a deeper sense of the true ruggedness of the Idaho wilderness. There's much more to it than meets the eye of the casual observer, flying over in an airliner or driving by on one of the state highways. Sometimes the best way to know a place, any place, is to experience it directly without the mediation of a guide. Other times it can be profoundly illuminating to follow in the footsteps of a local guide like Jim Kingery. Often, though, it's more feasible to read the words of a guiding voice, such as Ann Zwinger's, or that of a more local writer, such as Montana's Rick Bass or Idaho's John Rember, who can teach us not only what the writer knows, but how the writer senses and appreciates and articulates his or her encounters with the wild world. For decades, Zwinger, who published her first book, Beyond the Aspen Grove, at the age of 45. That's quite a lesson. She ended up publishing more than 20 books, but didn't publish a single book until she was 45 years old. She played this role, guiding us on nature walks and floats in person and through her writings. Her work will continue to accompany us through the rest of our days as we try to live decent lives on a planet that's changing due to our own too ardent hungers. We are complicit in the changing even as we drive long distances and fly bush planes to reach our wild destinations, doing so in order to love this planet. Anne Zwinger knew this love. She taught us to feel it. She taught us to see and to love the seeing and recording. She taught us to love revising and revising and revising our written responses to the world, which she enjoyed much more than the writing of first drafts. As I sit here at my writing table in the Frank Church wilderness, a pack train leaves the research station led by an old cowboy. A brief howl, there were wolves in the area where we were staying, a brief howl ricochets off the canyon walls and the horses bunch together. Anne Zwinger's words will echo in the minds of her readers, her students, for as long as we continue to walk the paths and pathless ways of wild country, just as the wild howl follows the packer and his horses upriver, quickening the pulse and inspiring attention. Thank you.